Hello, everyone. On behalf of Paraclete Press, welcome to this webinar with John Sweeney, Roy DeLeon, and Lisa Hendey on the Pope's Cat series. My name is Rachel McKendry, and I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Thank you so much for joining us today. A recording of today's presentation will be available to share with anyone who couldn't join us, and we'll also let you know how to get copies of John and Roy and Lisa's books from Paraclete. Please take a moment to find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to submit any questions you may have throughout today's conversation. And we'll hope to get to everyone. Just a few quick introductions. John Sweeney's popular history, The Pope Who Quit, a true medieval tale of mystery, death, and salvation, has been optioned by HBO. He's the author of 24 other books, including The Complete Francis of Assisi and When St. Francis Saved the Church, which was the winner of the 2015 award in history from the Catholic Press Association. The Pope's Cat series are his first books for children. Roy DeLeon is an oblate of St. Benedict, spiritual director, yoga instructor, graphic designer, and professional visual artist. He is also the author of the book Praying with the Body. Lisa Hendey is the founder of CatholicMom.com and a best-selling and award-winning author. Her children's projects include I Am God's Storyteller, the forthcoming I'm a Saint in the Making, and the Chime Travelers fiction series, which are read internationally in homes, classrooms, and parishes. Lisa travels internationally, giving workshops on faith, family, and Catholic new media topics. And Lisa will actually be leading our conversation today. Now, some of you may be wondering, what does Franciscan Friday have to do with the Pope's Cat? And that is a great question. But for one thing, John Sweeney, who is the author of the Pope's Cat series, as you all know, is quite a scholar and devotee of Francis. So it should not surprise us that this particular Pope in this series is so smitten by a cat named Margaret. And the simplicity of his character reflects a very Franciscan spirit. And we should also mention that the latest book in the series is Margaret and the Pope Go to Assisi. So it doesn't get much more Franciscan than that. Thank you so much all for being with us today. Thank you so much, Lisa, for leading us.
Oh, it's my honor. And I'm just, as I was sharing with John and Roy before we got started, I think I'm one of the original fans of the Pope's Cat series. So it feels very fitting that I should get to represent all the fans out there and today and having this conversation. So thank you. Thanks, Rachel. John, I want to dive right in by asking you, what inspired you? You've written so many volumes and so much work, but what inspired you to launch this project, and particularly a book about a cat, for goodness sake?
I think two things. One is that I've been a book publisher for a long time, an editor and a book publisher in addition to a writer, and I've published and edited lots of children's books, and it's always been the part of the program that I probably took the most joy from, working with an author on a children's book, finding the right illustrator, putting the two together, all of the process around a children's book. So I've done that for almost 30 years. And then I'm still in the midst of it, but I've sort of raised what I think of as like two generations of kids. Because I have a daughter who's 27 and another one who's 8. And so it's a pretty long span there, which means I've had a lot of years of reading great children's books with children sitting on my knees. And I love the read aloud process and the teaching process that books have, and just the wonder and imagination that children's books can have. So those are kind of what percolated in my background. And then when I got the idea for this, I thought, oh, I want to do it.
So I want to ask Roy a question really quick. Roy, what did you think when John came to you with this idea about a pope and a cat? What was your first reaction?
He didn't come to me. I came to him.
You came to him?
Yes, I think it was Facebook when he posted, I'm thinking of writing a children's book and I'm looking for an illustrator. So immediately, I was lucky to see it right away. Immediately I said, I forgot what I said, but something like, I will. I'd like to do it.
I remember what you said.
What did
I
I
remember what you
say?
said. So I knew Roy since about, I don't know, 2008, maybe. I
Uh-huh.
think
Right, right,
R-
yes.
Roy did a great book for Paraclete Press called Praying with the Body. And I got to know Roy and loved Roy as soon as I met him when I went to Memphis, because Roy was doing a workshop on praying with the body. And I still have on my phone the photographs we took at dinner, Roy DeLeon and Sybil Macbeth and me, and we had so much fun. It was 2009, that dinner and that workshop.
That's right.
And so I got to know Roy then in a way that I hadn't gotten to know him during the process of publishing Praying with the Body. And then all of a sudden, yes, Roy on Facebook said, I remember what you said. You said, I've always thought it would be such fun to illustrate a children's book. Would you consider me? And I immediately thought, oh my, yes. I mean, it was out of the blue, and I never would have thought of you, because you weren't a children's book illustrator, but
Right.
I'm delighted that you said it.
Well, you actually asked me, really? And I said, yeah. And after that, I didn't know what I signed up for.
Yeah, I know you feel that way.
That's so funny. So funny. John, I mean, as we've seen the series evolve, I was sharing with Roy that I think I had a look at the galleys long before they were actually a book, and I've been a fan from the start. But could you have anticipated the arc of the story? And do you kind of, as the storyteller, have a sense of where we're going? I mean, I think all of us who write, we have a vision for, that hopefully there will be 100 Pope's Cats books. Do you have like kind of an overall arc for the stories?
I suppose I should say yes, but no.
Just to keep it interesting.
What I knew I wanted was the first book. I wanted to introduce the Pope and Margaret. I wanted the Pope to find Margaret on the streets of Rome, to tuck her in his cassock, to take her inside the Vatican. I wanted Margaret to get into trouble, and I wanted to teach kids a little bit about what popes do and what goes on in Vatican City. And I knew I wanted to do those things in every book, but I wanted to do that in the first book. And then I was pretty sure the second book should be Christmas related, and that the third book should be sort of Easter related. But that's about as far as I went. And when it came to book 3 that was Easter related, I then decided I didn't want it to be Easter because there's just way too many books for kids on Easter. I mean, not that it's bad. I mean, of course, there's good reason why there's so many books for kids on Easter, but I wanted it to be a little different. So I made it about Holy Week mostly instead. But in terms of, planning it out, that's about as much as I sort of planned it out. And then I knew in book 4, I wanted them to leave the Vatican for the first time. And I thought, okay, where else could they possibly go if I'm going to write this book? Or if it's the Pope who we currently have in Vatican City, even though I'm very careful to say this is a fictional Pope, but he does feel a little bit like Pope Francis. And sometimes Roy makes him look a lot like Pope Francis. But it's a fictional Pope. But anyway, where else could they go but Assisi? So anyway, that's about as much as my sort of sketching it out has been.
That's awesome. And Roy, I mean, you must have a process too. I'm holding 2 of the books, and we can kind of see a little bit of an evolution in the artwork. But when you I guess I want to know kind of what is your process, because the illustrator comes to the storytelling in a different way than the author does. And so what does it look like when you start working on this, and how would you say your illustrations have evolved over time?
Well, yes, I wish that I can go back to the first cover and redraw it, because when I look at it now, compared to the last book, book 4, and also the book 5 that I'm working on right now, it's so different. And I was just waiting for someone from Paraclete Press or from John, hey, this is no longer the same as the first book. But I am glad that I haven't heard anything from John about that. Yes, so it's become a little bit more sophisticated, the rendering of the illustrations. Maybe because I'm really getting more comfortable with the process, and also the fact that from the beginning, John was such an easy boss to work with. Um, he gave me freedom to do whatever I want to do, and however I want to interpret uh, the idea. Um, what what we do is I asked John from the beginning to give me areas in the book or phrases, or even point it out in the manuscript that he sends me in terms of what to illustrate. And then he just says, for example, Margaret is doing this and that, but he does not give me any other detail, and that's what makes it more fun for me.
I think John
Yes.
would agree with me that he's not your boss, but he's actually your storytelling partner in this process. And so, John, I'm wondering how you felt and how you continue to feel when you get those early glances at the work that Roy is doing and in his part of the storytelling.
I'm over the moon. Roy just sent me one this morning, in fact, and every time he sends me one, I usually grab whoever is nearby, which is usually a child of mine or my wife, and I say, "Look at this thing! This is amazing!" So that's usually my reaction to what Roy sends. It is so much fun. I mean, I have a lot of fun, as I mentioned, on the other side, sort of the desk as a publisher of children's books. I have fun watching the illustrations come in and watching them meld with the text. And as Roy was sort of hinting at, one of the fun things is the way that the illustrator gets to tell the story that goes beyond the words. And there are occasions in a manuscript where I know I've said to Roy, I don't remember how I put it, but something like, "Why don't you take the story here? Like, show something that I'm not saying with the words, add something extra or different." And he's done that, and it's so much fun. But he just sent me one this morning that he just finished from book 5, and I grabbed my wife and said, "Look at this." So it's a lot of fun.
So awesome. Roy, I'm wondering for you, I mean, you mentioned this is your first project illustrating for children, but what do you think you've learned kind of spiritually from being a part of the Pope's Cat? And, how has it changed you both as a Christian and as an illustrator?
That's a good question, because I am not the in terms of spirituality, I am not the is the word liturgical. I don't really follow what's happening in the Vatican, and I it was suggested to me once, why don't I become a deacon? And after thinking about it, I said, no, that's not the area of spirituality that I can manage, that I can sustain. So it is very, very educational for me too, as John is trying to educate little kids about the Vatican and about the Catholic faith, how it's done on the Pope level. I learned a lot, and it's fascinating, especially with our Pope right now. I think it would be different if it was another Pope, which I don't really have an emotional connection with.
Mm-hmm. John, I'm curious about that idea of how we teach with story, because there are, many resources out there for families and for parishes and teachers that are sort of nonfiction teaching types of books. But you and I are both, I think, very committed to story as a very powerful way of teaching. Say a few words about why that's such a powerful force for sharing our faith.
I will. And as I answered that question, I want to also answer the one that you asked Roy, because I was wishing that you'd ask me that one. So
good.
So for me, I'm going to answer it because it's the same thing. So I'm not a very didactic person. I think sometimes I talk about things that I'm really not an expert about. So that's about those are the moments when I go wrong didactically. But when it comes to something that I want to teach or communicate, I don't like to just tell it to people. I'd rather make it a story. I'd rather make it put flesh on it in a way. And so for me, Margaret puts flesh on stuff that I want to learn. And this is where I'm answering the question that you asked, Roy, is that for me, the moments in the books of the Pope's Cat where Margaret is doing something tender, or Margaret is feeling her way to understand something, those are the moments when I am learning something. And I get choked up when I read them. Like I can't read Margaret's First Holy Week and read the part and look at the pictures, of course, while I'm reading it. The part about where it looks like she's praying next to the Pope in the Sistine Chapel. And then later when she is at the prison with the Pope where she was afraid to go, who wouldn't be? And then she watches what he's doing. And then she goes and licks the feet of, while he's washing the feet. I get choked up even just talking about it now. Because Margaret is feeling her way towards discovering the stuff that I need to continue to discover.
That's beautiful. I think too about those moments that parents can have with their children. So many of us who are parents, we think fondly of those times when we've shared a story with our child and read it over and over and over again. And what a gift that is for families. Roy, I recently toured a Catholic church, and as part of the tour, the person who was showing me around told me that the designer of the stained glass windows had hidden little secrets in the windows that were sort of little homages to people that were important to the artist. And I'm wondering, is there anything hidden in any of the illustrations of the Pope's Cat series, or anything that, I mean, that's just kind of your own little wink to John or to somebody else in your life?
Yeah.
I'm glad you didn't say no.
Nothing nasty though, just like what I've read about some of the famous Disney animations where animators hid some nasty little drawings. Yeah, I think it was the first book. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think it was the first book when they were having a luncheon, and so there were a lot of people, and I snuck in John in there.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Did you really?
Breaking news in the Pope's Cat series.
Well, see, now I'm looking. Oh, yeah. Is that supposed to be me right there?
There you go. Yeah.
It looks awesome. More like Scott Hahn.
Well, consider that a compliment then, John. That's so awesome.
So yeah, so that's I did a little bit of that, but not
that's
so much.
Totally
but
fun.
What I was gonna say is that for example, when I do portraits, I cannot do portraits of people that I don't like. Someone asked me to do their portrait once, but I was not really comfortable with this person, and the portrait came out as angry, but I didn't think it was. So doing these illustrations for the book, I had to be really in it. Otherwise, it will be lifeless. I will not have my heart in it. Even though I am not a detail person, like when I go to a church, when I went to Rome once, I'm not really concerned about or I didn't really want to know who the architect was or how many bricks there are in that church. I just want to know how it feels to be in that church. I just want to know what the atmosphere is when I sit on at the church. So that's how I approach it. But of course, drawing it, I had to show some of the details to make it look real, or at least believable for kids. So that's the approach.
Great. Well, you do a great job. And I think one of the things that struck me as the series has evolved is the sense of light and of motion and, you know, of really being in these places. One of my favorite, you know, the scene in the train, the little train cabin is just a very, to me, iconic sense of being right there with the Pope and with Margaret. You know, John, you said you don't have a sense of the story arc. Maybe it's the writer in me that wants to know the backstory and the forward story. And last time we talked, you hinted a little bit at what's to come next for the series, and that there may be a sense of a peek back into the Pope's life. Do you want to say a little bit more about that before we have to wrap up?
Sure. So book 5 is already written and Roy is illustrating it, and he'll be finished this summer, and it will come out next spring. And it is a prequel. So one of the fun things when you do a series like this, and Lisa, you're going to tell us about your series in a second, because I'm going to ask you the same question, is you get to put in the stuff that you enjoy putting in. I mean, you know, if Margaret gets in trouble, she can get in trouble in ways that I think are fun instead of ways that someone else might think are fun. And if Margaret's going to go somewhere outside of Vatican City, she can go to Assisi, whereas, you know, there's 1,000 other places she could have gone. And so I am fascinated by Conclave, and I wanted to do a book in the series on Conclave. And it took me a while to figure it out, even though the answer was obvious, which is that it needed to be a prequel. It took me a while to figure out the answer to the problem, which was, well, I can't do a Conclave book, because then the beloved Pope that the kids have come to love in this series has died, you know, because we're not going to have a conclave unless the Pope is dead. So it's a prequel. So you get to see what happened when the Pope, this Pope was elected, and how Margaret actually was there, and how what fun that is. So that's
before they actually knew each other.
Before they actually knew each other, exactly. And actually, but by the way, I don't know right now if people who are watching us can see all three of us while I'm talking. I hope they can, because it's become clear to me that Roy has just started to illustrate what we're doing, and it's amazing how he does this. So I'm hoping that by the time we're done, he's going to show us what he's done, because he's incredible. But anyway, while I still have the floor, Lisa, I want to hear about Time Travelers series, and what is the arc of it? Where is it going? What is your vision for the future? Because you have so many fans for this series.
Yeah, you know, well, thanks for asking. I sort of still want to talk about the Pope's cat, but I guess I'll answer that question, since you are my editor, so I have to follow. You are my boss, right, John? So, you know, the Time Traveler series to me was, like for you, a total gift and a surprise, because my work had prior to that been all nonfiction for adults, which is wonderful. And I never thought I would be a writer to begin with. So to have that chance was great. And then to have the chance to have a publisher come to me and ask me to write for children. Actually, they didn't ask. When they came to me, they wanted an adult nonfiction. And I said, well, contractually, I can't do that, but I'd love to pitch this to you. And I was so happy that my editor at the time took it and said, we don't want one book, we want two, and we want a series. So we want the first two to drop at the same time, which is really smart, because when you write a series, the kids finish one and then immediately want to go to the next. So the Time Traveler series, my book's about a brother and sister twin who encounter real world problems in their real life, and then travel in time and learn a lesson from a Catholic saint that they have to go back then and apply to solving their problem. And for me, learning about children's writing and learning particularly about agency and giving our characters agency has been a great gift, that the children in the book shouldn't be controlled by the adults in their life, but should be empowered the way that we're trying to empower our kids in real life to solve problems around them, because God created them uniquely with gifts just as they are, to bring love into the world. And so the series has 5 books. as you mentioned, or I think it was mentioned in your bio, the optioning of one of your projects, and Time Travelers has been optioned, not going anywhere anytime fast. But that provides you a great ability to kind of daydream. And so for me, I have, because I'm a fan of series like Lost, which I think when Lost came out, it provided us so much look into the power of not just the story that we see, but to imagine everything around it that could fill in the gaps. And so for me, I think about prequels and what comes after, and the books were intentionally written with some of those hints in there so that I can go back to some of my older characters and tell their stories, because there are countless stories of saints to be told. So I do hope that at some point we'll revisit the series and tell some more of those stories. The groundwork has been laid.
I hope you do too. I hope you do too. And actually, while you were talking, I'm sorry if it was loud here. I'm sitting outside and there's a chickadee yelling at me here. So
that's awesome.
I think I'm sitting too close.
It's Franciscan Friday, John.
I'm in her space.
Yeah.
So Roy, show us what you're doing.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing. Look at that.
You're drawing a picture of Scott Hahn.
Well, it is Franciscan Friday after all.
Yes, exactly.
We do have some questions coming in, if this would be a good moment. Here's a question for both John and Roy from someone I know who is an artist, Rebecca. She says, which of you decided what Margaret would look like?
I'll start, but I want Roy to mostly answer. I'm trying to remember now quickly. I know we talked about it. I seem to remember Roy saying he didn't have a lot of experience drawing a cat. And I remember lots of experimenting with Margaret and how she should look. And okay, that's about as far as my memory is going. Roy, do you remember?
Yeah, the beginning was torture because I'm not a cat person, or I'm not a pet person, period. And so it is alien to me to draw animals. I love drawing people. So the anatomy part of it is really difficult for me. And you can't really invent that unless you're doing a caricature or cartoon, because if it's close to being realistic, people will actually spot right away that's not how cats look like. That's why I really would like to go back to the first cover and redo Margaret, because whenever I look at it, it's a little bit, I really would like to get to it. So anyway, it's good that I have a friend who is really a cat person. So I checked with her in terms of, hey, does this look okay? Does this look like a cat already? Is this convincing enough? And she gave me the okay sign, and I became more confident doing cats thanks to Google. And yeah, that's how it evolved for me. Yes, thank you.
Well, you do great cats now.
I wish you had Rosa and Martin way back, and then I'll just ask you to, how about having Rosa do this in this pose and for my reference. Yeah.
John, you should give everybody an update on the kittens and how they're doing.
I think it's adorable that people remember their names. That's the way that social media works, right? If you post enough pictures of your cats, people will start to remember them. Yeah, no, I am definitely a cat person, but one of the funny things when the Pope's Cat was first released was that I did a video with my dog, and it's still on YouTube. You can still see it. But I remember it's me sitting on the floor. It was like a one-take video of me holding my phone, sitting on the floor, saying, "This is what the Pope's cat is, and I'm the one who wrote it. And I love cats, but I don't have a cat because here's my dog." And I showed a picture of, I was lying there with my 60-pound black mutt, Max, who we still have. But we used to think that meant we couldn't have a cat. But just, I don't know, a month ago, we adopted 2 kittens from the same litter, Martin and Rosa. And they are adorable and fabulous. And the only sad thing about them so far for me is that for the first couple of weeks, I have a bathrobe with a couple of big pockets, and I was able to put one in each pocket in my bathrobe and walk around. And then their heads would be sticking out. I can't do that anymore. They started out with us at 2 pounds, and now they're about 4 pounds, and so they don't fit in my pockets anymore.
That's awesome. I wonder if Rachel's going to pop in with another question. She is.
Sure am. Well, you did sort of answer this en route. Someone was asking if you could talk about your personal experiences with cats. So I think that pretty much covers that one. But Christy Jenkins, speaking of Max, says, will there be a puppy or another pet added?
Maybe there should be. I think my wife suggested that to me early on, because Max is more her dog than he is my dog, because I've had lots of cats, but instead we had Max. So I think she's the one who suggested that Margaret needed to have a run-in with a dog or something. In every book, Margaret needs to have a run-in with Vatican officials, because I think that's really fun. And so maybe, sorry, there's a hummingbird right here being attacked by another hummingbird. Okay, sorry. Hummingbirds are so amazing to me. Anyway, sorry. Maybe there needs to be sort of a high-ranking Vatican official who all of a sudden has a dog, and the dog and the Pope's cat, have troubles getting along.
It could be a book on reconciliation.
That would be fun. See now,
awesome.
Lisa, your series is better at the application. See, because your mind immediately went to what would be sort of the virtue or the application. I'm not so sure the Pope's cat is quite that, much of an arrow to the bullseye in the same way.
Here's a question for Roy from someone you know and love, Marita.
Oh.
She says, since this is your first children's book series, what have you learned about yourself as an artist or as a human through this process?
Yeah, leave it to my daughter. That's a good question. Well, I am someone who I will call not disciplined enough. And having this contract, this job, after I retired, is putting some kind of a structure in my life. And so that's a very good thing for me. Otherwise, I'll just be floating and be going somewhere that I might not have planned. So this is really keeping me in the spiritual, in my spiritual journey, because I can't help but get into that mode when working on Margaret. Because I think we alluded to that earlier, that when I'm working on these illustrations, I had to feel what I was doing. Like, for example, if it was the interaction between the Pope and Margaret, I have to feel that. So I have to conjure that, and therefore that kindness that John was talking about, that grace and the tenderness between the two, I had to feel that. Otherwise, it will not show in my illustrations. So that's how it felt for me. It's not that I learned it, but it's more like it was unearthed. It was brought up by the illustration, by the process of illustrating those scenes.
You know, Lisa mentioned what secrets do you put into the illustrations? And what came to my mind immediately was all of the art that you managed to capture so beautifully in the settings, whether it's the art inside St. Paul's or the Sistine Chapel that John mentioned, or in the Giotto's frescoes of St. Francis in Assisi. I just think it's amazing how those scenes are so beautifully conveyed as a children's illustration.
I want to jump in because Roy won't tout himself like I want to tout him. He does an incredible job. I mean, so when we have a new book coming, I will send him notes and I'll say things like, I remember for the first book, I said things like, okay, there's going to be Swiss guards. So, you know, start looking at Swiss guards and get used to the idea of illustrating Swiss guards. And then I said, okay, there's gonna need to be, I know this sounds like a lot, but there's gonna need to be like a panorama inside St. Peter's Basilica. And I mean, somehow he figures out how to do this. I mean, the illustration of that panorama of inside St. Peter's Basilica is astonishing. And then the ones that you mentioned as well. So I know that Roy spends hours and hours on these, and he won't probably mention either that he's gotten an injury to his shoulder because he's spent so much time illustrating these books.
Roy, oh dear. Here's a question from a fellow author friend of ours named Tracy. Couple questions. The first is, how many Pope's Cat books do you plan on writing? And the part two is, how come some of the books are illustrated in black and white, but the rest are in color?
I wish there was a better answer for that first one. I mean the second one. The answer for the second one is that we originally thought that the series could be in black and white. And with the first book, I don't know, honestly, I think with the first book, it felt like it was okay, that it did work for it to be in black and white. But then when we realized that the second book was going to be a book about Christmas and for Christmas, we thought, well, you can't leave it black and white. It has to be color because it's for Christmas. And so then we made that one color, and then we created a problem. So the answer to the problem then was that all the others, you know, we would decide each one. So we went back to black and white, and we went back to color. So it's every other book, but it's a little bizarre, I realize. And it would be glorious if we were able to sort of put them all together in color at some point. I don't know if Roy will survive long enough. His shoulder will survive long enough to do that. The answer to the first question is, as I sometimes have said to some good friends who have asked that question, I've said, honestly, I would love to do nothing else than write Margaret stories. If I could just, you know, quit my day job and stop writing all the other things that I write and only write Margaret books, sign me up now. So I would love to write 100 of them. But of course, the best answer to that question is the market will sort of decide if there's justification for more. As of right now, there is going to be a 5th and a 6th. And that's all that is decided.
Thank you so much. A few comments. Gail says she loves the prequel solution to problem solving. All good wishes. And then she also suggests that maybe there will be kittens for Margaret.
Oh, well, first she has to fight with a dog, I think, but then I don't know, maybe. Although, you know, really, there shouldn't be kittens, to be honest, because if anyone who adopts a kitten today knows that every kitten is neutered or spayed, because there are way too many kittens out there who are put to death because there's no one to adopt them, and we probably don't need to keep creating more kittens. So I'm not so sure if she should have kittens. I'll have to think about that one.
Especially on the streets of Rome.
Yeah.
So many cats. Oh, she agrees with you. She's the person who asked that question. Oh, this is interesting in terms of how the story evolves with the art and the words and black and white versus color. Rudy says, since book 1 was in black and white, why do you mention that the Queen had been the one wearing the blue dress?
Okay, that's someone who's reading too closely. Stop reading so closely.
Rudy also asks, why was Margaret examined by the Pope's personal physician instead of being examined by a veterinarian? This is a very alert reader, John.
Well, it's a very cat sensitive reader, and I appreciate that. It's kind of like I was really pleased. Book 4 is Margaret and the Pope go to Assisi, and I was very pleased in the early going of this book that I got a couple of comments right away from cat organization folks saying kudos for putting Margaret in a cat carrier on the train. So, there are certain things that cat lovers and those who really care about animals pay attention to, and I'm glad to have them as readers.
Can I say one thing about that, Rachel?
Of course.
So I don't know Rudy's age, the questioner's age, but one thing when you write for children, very little gets past them. And John and I have both done school visits. And one of the most humbling things is to do Q&A with a bunch of second or third graders and to let them ask their questions, because often they have taken the story that they've bonded to and created this whole world in their own minds around it. And they do ask these very, why this and how about this? And they'll point out things to you that you maybe haven't ever thought of before. So I think that's a really interesting thing. And it's actually a great thing as somebody who's created a story to see somebody else bond to it to that level, as Rudy
Yes.
did.
You get correspondence like that all the time, don't you, Lisa?
Yeah. And I like pen paling with children. So I have a lot of pen pals, and they send me ideas, they send me storylines. And it's really super cool. Also, Roy would love to hear that oftentimes they'll send you their own illustrations of the stories, things that they have thought of. And so that's really neat to see that level of connection.
Yeah, how rewarding to see that your words have encouraged them to engage on such a level.
Yeah.
That shows real learning, like real taking to heart. That's fantastic. Roy, here's a question for you. Do you continue to teach yoga? Where, when?
I stopped teaching yoga because of the driving part of it. So yes, sadly, that's one part of my life that I retired from. But my kind of yoga right now is more inner than the popular definition of yoga in this culture is more about the physical aspect of yoga. And my yoga is more the inner side of it. So I don't do asanas anymore, not as much as when I was teaching yoga.
Can you tell us a little bit about your book, Praying with the Body?
Sure. This was inspired by the time when I went to Rome to attend the first World Benedictine Oblates Conference. That's when I went to Monte Cassino, and where I saw the big sculpture of Saint Benedict kneeling with his arms raised up and supported by two monks dying. And when I saw that, I said, he's praying with the body. And at that time, I was in the midst of teaching yoga. I've been teaching yoga by that time, maybe for about 10 years already. And I went with it because I have been already doing praying with the body in my yoga classes without telling them that they are praying with the body. Because in yoga classes, it's amazing. It's okay for them to, or for us to mention Buddha, but not Jesus. And that's when I realized that those are just labels. And I went to the deeper part of spirituality, which is, for me, is love. Everything, all the great traditions are rooted in love. And that's where I based this book on. But because I'm a Benedictine oblate, I focus on the divine office, which of course revolves around Psalms. And I love the Psalms. And I worked hard to make this book can be used by even non-Christians, so that it's available to more people than just Christians or the Jewish traditions. So that's where it came from.
Thank you so much. Lisa, here's a question for you. Gail asks, for what ages is the Time Traveler series?
It really depends on the reader. I think officially, education-wise, they're ranked as 2nd to 5th graders. And if you have a student who's using the accelerated reader program at their school, those first couple of books are actually on the AR list and have tests for that. But it really depends on the child. So, I mean, I've had kindergartners, I've had 8th graders. So, and lots of moms and dads who told me they were reading one chapter at a time. And after their kid would go to sleep, they'd keep reading and finish so they could see what.
That's great.
That's awesome. Oh, and this is a nice comment from Sally, who says, what a wonderful discussion. Many thanks, John, Roy, and Lisa. Perfect for Franciscan Friday.
Well, see, there we go.
That's good. That brings us to the end of our questions. I don't know if anyone has closing comments or more you want to talk about.
Roy, how is your shoulder?
First of all, my shoulders are really, really doing good. And that's because we were able, you gave me a lot of time to do this book 5. So I'm able to, what's the word? Distance or
Yes.
have it, in somehow when I'm working on this on my iPad, this is where I do the work. I get cramped because when I'm working on the drawing, I get focused that I forget everything else. And then I forget that my shoulder is in a weird formation. So doing it in long periods of time and where there's a lot of rest in between, I'm able to keep my shoulders happy.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm curious, Roy, we saw you drawing. You could hold up your illustration again because I want to see the update on it as you kept going. Oh,
there you go.
I'm in there too. That's so awesome.
That's right.
So we see you drawing right now with, I'm guessing it's pen and ink or something like that on paper.
Yeah.
But the illustrations are done, as you said, on the iPad. What's your process for? I mean, do you initially do all the drawings on paper and then take them to the iPad?
Well, in the beginning, when John sends me the manuscript with his notes on what to draw, then I do some what we call thumbnails. These are really rough sketches of what I would like to or how I interpret the instructions, and then sends it to John, and he says, good. And I do a little bit more finished or smoother drawing of the roughs, and then take it to the iPad and then I look for similar images on Google, and then I put them together and collage them and then illustrate from them. So yeah, thank goodness for Google. Because I asked John if I can go to Italy to do research.
Only if I can carry your luggage.
Yes,
No,
I wish.
That's a little bit of a sore spot for John because he was actually supposed to be in Italy for this.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm going back in November. Hopefully the Pope's not gonna, anyway. So can you see this? So this is my favorite illustration maybe of all. It's in the 4th book. And when I look at that, I think, Roy, you know how to draw a cat now. There's no question about it. That's Margaret walking down into the crypt below the lower church in the Basilica of San Francesco in Assisi. And man, when I saw that piece of art, I thought, it's as if you haven't been there, right, Roy? You haven't actually been there.
I have. That's why
you
I
have been there. Okay.
Yes.
I felt like you have to have been there to be able to draw that picture.
Yes, I have been there, and I went down to that crypt, and that's where, when I touched the central column of where, right, and people
Yes.
go around it, and
Yes.
people touch the central column as they go
Yes.
around it.
Yes.
That's where I got hit, because when I touched it, my knees buckled. I had to go to the side, and otherwise I'll be on the floor, on the ground.
Gosh.
And I don't know what to say about that, but I know I'm getting goose pimples right now just remembering that time.
Well, no wonder then, because all of that comes through in that picture.
Thanks.
Absolutely. John, we do have one more question for you from Elizabeth. She says, are you possibly considering another children's series like Margaret and the Pope, but with another theme?
I have not considered it. No. As I mentioned before, I'd rather just write 100 Margaret books. But by the way, if we have 1 second, no one's asked why is she called Margaret.
No, they haven't.
And so I'm going to answer my own question because I like answering this one, which is that there are some great saints, of course, named Margaret. So there's good reason to name her Margaret. And I have a great friend from high school named Margaret. But she was named Margaret because a very good friend of mine, who I actually was in Rome with in 2009 on a trip together. He and I traveled for 7 or 8 days, actually when I was researching the Pope Who Quit. But anyway, he wanted for many, many years to have a child, and finally was able to have a child with his wife, and they named her Margaret. So that was right when the first book was coming out, and it was clear to me that her name needed to be Margaret. So if you look at the dedication, my dedication, Roy and I each have a dedication in each book. If you look at my dedication in the Pope's Cat, the first book, it says to Margaret, Mary, and Anne, because actually they then had 3 girls in rapid succession. But that's why she's named Margaret.
That's great. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions again. Oh, there's the dedication.
Well, no, actually, that's not it.
That's not it. That's a different one. Never mind.
Close. It's close.
Not quite. Well, thank you so much to Lisa and John and Roy and to everyone who joined us today. This event will be available on YouTube later on, and then for only 2 weeks after that. So please tell anyone you know who wanted to come but wasn't able to make it to see it there soon. And all of the books that we talked about today are available from your local booksellers and from paracletepress.com. And if you use the coupon code KIDS with an exclamation point, KIDS exclamation point, you'll receive 20% off of all of our children's books today. And there's also free shipping available this month on orders over $45. So we just ask you to please consider gifting these books to all the children in your life, friends, family, maybe your local schools or libraries, your church, any small groups of parents or educators that you might belong to. Your generosity will help support all of our authors and Paraclete Press in our ongoing work and in providing free webinars like this one today. So again, thank you so much to all 4 of you. We hope you all enjoyed this time together as much as we did. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety, and we hope you'll join us for more of these times together with our authors. Also, take a peek at the Paraclete website to find out about our upcoming online retreat series this summer. Some really good stuff coming up, so I encourage you to check that out. Thank you again. God bless you all, and have a great afternoon.
Lisa, Roy, Rachel, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.